This shows that the revelations of the Quran is largely about Muhammad's life, but there's also specific things, many things that are only about Muhammad that you can only fulfill while Muhammad is alive and you're in his presence. Did Muhammad receive everything and transmit everything faithfully as he was commanded to do in Surah 5? Or did he not complete it? Is it the perfectly clear, divine inspired speech of Allah, or is it a man-made document that's the ramblings of some death cult leader that used it to gain what he wanted? This is my version of Surah 115, which I named the completion. Welcome. Hello, denominators. In this video, we're going to give a slightly different argument that you might not have heard before. Partly because I think I made it up, but I've never found anyone else making this type of argument. So if it's not original to me, then I independently came up with the same argument as someone else. And it is, the Quran appears to not be a complete book. And that's a problem because the Quran claims to be a complete book. So you might be able to call this the completeness dilemma or the completeness problem of the Quran. And we're going to go through how the Quran itself not having a clear end actually kind of disproves Islam. So what do I mean by this? How does this disprove the Quran? Well, the Quran was given very slowly, unlike most of the other books of scripture. The Quran was given over 23 years to Muhammad, and it was mostly revolving the events that were happening in his life. You know, whenever he would preach the Quraysh tribe, they would rebuke him, they would ask him for signs and wonders and miracles and all that, so he's just responding to it. So a lot of the Quran is just biographical material about Muhammad's life, which is interesting. You get wars and the description of wars, you get him and his wife's disputes, you get lots of interesting bits that are basically shaping, like the entire Quran is a narrative of Muhammad and his life as a prophet. Why is this? If the Quran is what it claims to be, which is the eternal speech of Allah written on preserved tablets in heaven 50,000 years before creation, why is it that the Quran contains so much material that is just Muhammad's life? And not only does it contain that material, it also has very specific things that are only applied to Muhammad, such as Surah 33-37, which is directly about Muhammad's marriage to Zainab bint Jahsh, which was a controversial marriage to begin with. So he married his own adopted daughter, well, his adopted son's wife. So it was his stepdaughter, which was not halal for him to marry. So he received a revelation saying that it was fine for him particularly to be married to this woman, and then he abolished adoption to make it not incest. So you have stuff like that. You have stuff like Surah 66, 1-5, which is basically a domestic dispute within Muhammad's house between his wives and himself. You have 33-50, which is the giving Muhammad special rights of marriage. You know, him being able to have more wives, being able to treat the wives in ways that everyone else wasn't able to treat them. Surah 49 is just filled with this type of stuff. So Surah 49:2, for example, says, "O believers, do not raise your voices above the voice of the prophet, nor speak loudly to him as you do to one another, or your deeds will become void while you are unaware." The deeds becoming void basically means you go to hell, because the way Allah judges on Judgment Day is you have the good deeds and the bad deeds, and if the good deeds outweigh the bad deeds, you go to heaven. Well, if your good deeds become void, then all you're left with the bad deeds and you go to hell. So if you speak louder than the prophet, if you shout him down or whatever, you're going to hell. It's just interesting. And then you have 58:12, which is, "O believers, when you consult the messenger privately, give something in charity as it gives zakat before your consultation is better and purer for you. But if you lack the means, then Allah is the most forgiving, most merciful." That is a problem because Muhammad is specifically hey, if you want to talk to me, give me some money, which is weird. So you have all that, plus you have interesting instances. You have there's over 25 instances in the Quran where the Quran explicitly says to obey the prophet, and I'll flash some of these on screen real quick. So we have over 24 verses that is obey Allah and obey his messenger, which makes Muhammad sound more like a cult leader than he does a prophet, where you have blind obedience to Muhammad in all circumstances, and you're basically just following the whims of this random dude who has a big mole on his back. This shows that the revelations of the Quran is largely about Muhammad's life, but there's also specific things, many things that are only about Muhammad that you can only fulfill fulfill while Muhammad is alive and you're in his presence? Why does Allah's eternal speech contain this type of information? That doesn't make any sense. And when I was thinking about this, I came up with a problem of, if the revelations are revolving around Muhammad's life and they're not predetermined before creation, they are somehow contingent on Muhammad's life. Like we have Surah, I believe it's 111? We have a Surah 111 about Muhammad's uncle going to hell. That would seem to make Allah's eternal speech dependent on Muhammad's uncle existing and his uncle rejecting Allah, which means Allah is a slave to his pre-knowledge of Allah's uncle, or the Quran was not eternal and it is being clarified and given in real time to suit Muhammad's needs. I was like, this is a lot of weird conundrums. Well, this opens up a dilemma within Islam. This was just a question that popped in my head one day. If Muhammad had not been poisoned and dying youngish, he's in his 50s or early 60s. If Muhammad had not been poisoned at Khaybar by the Jewish woman and had not died young and had lived another 10, 20, 30 years, would he have received more revelations from Allah? Why this is important is because the Quran claims to be a perfect book, and Allah says specifically in Surah 567 that if you don't deliver everything that I have instructed you, then it has not been revealed. So this question is, did Muhammad receive everything and transmit everything faithfully as he was commanded to do in Surah 5, or did he not complete it? If yes, to the dilemma, if yes, more things would have come out and more revelation would have been given had Muhammad lived longer, that implies that the Quran as a text was historically open and therefore incomplete at his death. So the eternal speech of Allah, the eternal speech of God, had not yet been fully delivered to mankind if Muhammad died before conveying all that had been revealed to him, or all that would have been revealed to him, which would have made him fail his prophetic mission and journey to Allah by the Quran's own criterion, which we see in 567. And even early tafsir that are important, like Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir, agree that 567 is a command from Allah to deliver everything, especially the difficult and embarrassing or controversial parts of the Quran. So Ibn Kathir says, Allah orders his messenger to convey all that was revealed to him and his promises, and he promises to protect him from the people, for he is commanded to deliver it fully. Al-Qurtubi says, this verse proves that the prophet was commanded to deliver all of it without omission or delay, for concealing any part would nullify his mission. So even within the Islamic commentary, we get that 567 is understood as an all or nothing decree. If he failed to deliver any part of it, equals a failure to deliver all of it, according to Allah. If the revelation was still in progress or incomplete at his death, that would imply a mission that was not fulfilled, a mission that was cut short. That would both contradict his success as a prophet and as the seal of the prophet, specifically from Surah 33:40, and it would undermine his claim of perfection from Surah 5:3, which we'll get to a little bit in the video. So that would make him a false prophet and would make the Quran a false book, as Allah couldn't protect his prophet from poison, which he claimed to have been able to do in Surah 567, mind you. Allah claimed that he would protect the servant in order to deliver the message faithfully. He was not able to do that. So that's interesting. But if Muhammad completed revelation, like if Surah 5:3 is the actual last ayah to ever be given, which we'll get to, let's say, so if Muhammad recited all of the Quran and none of it more, like let's say he lived another 10 years and nothing else would have been given past 110 or 5 or 9 or whatever you want to say the end of the Quran is. Let's say nothing else would have been given. Okay, that's fine. But why does the Quran not have a clear ending? Now you could say, oh, well, 5:3 was a clear ending, but it's really not, and we'll get to it in a second. Why is there no clear beginning and ending to the Quran and content? You have Al-Fatiha, which is the opening, and it kind of feels like a beginning, but it's not quite a beginning in the sense that like Genesis 1 is a beginning. So why is the clarity of the Quran so bad when the Quran claims to be a perfectly clear book? Why is it so unclear about its own ending? Why does it lack this context? Why does it lack this content? It undermines its authority. It undermines its claim to be perfect clarity. And at best, it exposes itself as ramblings of Muhammad, not as the eternal speech of Allah. which Mohammad then used for his own personal gain, and Allah is just a sock puppet to get what he wants. So either the Quran is incomplete, and Allah failed to give all of his eternal speech to mankind due to failing to protect the Prophet from the people, which he promised to do in Surah 567, or the Quran is not clear and Allah is a horrible communicator, which contradicts his own claims about the clarity of both his speech and the Quran, and his wisdom and knowledge and all that. So that is the main dilemma of this problem. Allah failed, or Allah is unclear. Either one of those contradict the Quran. Either one of those is a massive problem, and I feel like it brings down the Quran, which then would bring down Islam. So let's get into the ending problem of the Quran, and what Muslims actually believe is the ending of the Quran. So if you look at the last surahs from chronology, you get Surah 5, Surah 9, and Surah 110. Those are generally agreed to be the last ones given, and a general order is 5, 9, 110. 110 being the conquest of Mecca, and being the last thing revealed. Surah 9 is breaking the oaths to Mecca so they can go conquer it. And Surah 5 is like setting up the groundwork for some of the last bits of his revelation. So 9 and 10, or 9 and 110 come after Surah 5, yet Muslims claim that Surah 5:3 is the end of the Quran. So let's get into that. One thing to note is that the Quran doesn't have a clear ending in general. Even with Surah 5:3, it's not actually that clear. And if we compare it to any other book, it's very shockingly bad at ending. So if we even compare it to the Bible, Allah's previous revelation, we see that Genesis is a clear beginning, in the beginning, and then Revelation ends with a very clear ending. It is saying, it's promising, hey, anyone who alters this book, a curse will be on them, and is praying for Jesus to come back. And it ends with amen. It is done. So it has a clear beginning, it has a clear ending with warnings of alteration and of a prayer of the end to come. So it has this beautiful, consistent, logical ordering of the Bible and one consistent message throughout. We don't get that in the Quran. The Quran is not organized by chronology, it's organized by surah length, kind of. So Surah 1 is the shortest surah, or one of the shortest surahs, and it's right at the beginning. It's called the opening, Al-Fatiha. And so that is a proper introduction, kind of. It's not necessarily in the beginning, it's just like a prayer that you do, but it's not like this is the beginning of Revelation or like any of those type of like true beginning type statements. It's just a prayer to Allah, by Allah, somehow, and it also condemns and curses Jews and Christians. That's the opening of the Quran. Then it goes to Surah 2, which is the longest, then it goes downward. But this actually, the idea of it going from longest to shortest doesn't quite work. Like if you plot a linear regression, it's fine, but the actual chapter to chapter lengths doesn't work whatsoever. For example, Surah 26 is the second longest surah after Al-Baqarah, the cow. So what should be the third surah is actually the 26th surah. And Surah 37 is the fifth longest surah. And then 56 is the 21st longest surah. So we have these random spikes in length, and then you have some in the middle that are like only like 20, 30, 40 verses. So we have some really massive verses coming way later, and some really short verses coming right at the middle and beginning. So I'll put a chart up on screen of the surah ordering. That for sure doesn't make any sense. If the surahs are supposed to be ordered by length, why is it that it's all over the place? That's stupid. Why is it, if it is supposed to be ordered by content, why does the content jump around so sporadically? Why are things not grouped together better? If it's supposed to be arranged by chronology, it's not at all. Surah 110 is supposed to be the last one. The cow is supposed to be after like 80 surahs. So why is the second surah the second surah? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There is no logical ordering to the Quran. So that by itself, the lack of definitive narrative arc suggests that it lacks a planned completion, potentially due to Muhammad's death interrupting the process, or that Muhammad never actually planned an ending to begin with. There was never an ending actually given, which is a problem. The Quran seems to lack this basic writing trope. If Allah is the best communicator ever, if he's the best author of all time, why is it that Allah is worse than humans at writing endings? That's an interesting problem, which I'm going to demonstrate in a second with my own version of Surah 5.3. But the Muslims explain that, oh no, Surah 5.3 is a part of the farewell address. It's after they conquered Mecca, and it's during the last Hajj. It's during the final message that Muhammad ever gave. And it says in part of Surah 5.3 that today I have perfected your religion for you, completed my blessing upon you, and chosen as your religion Islam. They treat that sentence as the final sentence of the Quran. The problem is that's not the full Surah 5.3. I'll put that on the screen now. This doesn't really work super well. There is a hadith from Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim that links that the final Hajj to that ayah. Well, that is dated to around 10 AH, so March 632 CE, not CE, AD. Sorry, let me correct that in my notes. Then you also have Sunan Tamadi Hadith 3366, which ties Surah 110 to the Prophet's awareness of his impending death, and he suggests it as the last Surah. So we have two different Hadith that mention one as the last thing and the other one as the last thing, which is interesting. But this has some strange problems. If you read the context of Surah 5.3, it's Surah 5.2 through 4, and it's all about the same topic. It's about dietary laws within the Quran. So if you look at just the context that's happening there, it is all the same thing. It's just going from dietary law to dietary law to dietary law. So in the middle of this dietary law section, 5.3 is just thrown in and this one sentence is included. And if that is supposed to be the end of the Quran, it doesn't make any sense to place it there. Why would you put it in the middle of this section about dietary laws instead of just making it a surah by itself? If it's supposed to actually be ordered from biggest to smallest, then why don't you have the smallest at the end and just be a single ayah of just, this is the end, and it's Surah 115? Why not do that? That makes way more sense. Why am I, a random person, more intelligent than Allah? That doesn't make any sense. Why isn't Surah 5.3 the last surah? Why is it awkwardly stitched between dietary laws? Surely if this was the last word revealed by Allah during the final Hajj, then it should have merited its own surah, just like Surah Al-Fatiha. That's just obvious, especially since Surah 110 is so short and written after 5. Surely it would just make sense to write another short one, but it didn't. You know, it would have elevated Allah in his divine providence and his understanding of what was happening to make that final one the shortest surah and the final one, but he didn't. So you would expect this to happen if an all-knowing, most wise being created a book. It would have a clear beginning and clear end, because human authors can do that in order to avoid ambiguity, in order to actually be clear, and yet it doesn't. So I wrote on my way home one day after class. I was walking home, and I had thought about this during class because I don't actually pay attention, and I was realizing, hey, this is a problem. Let me see if I can make up a better surah than 5.3. So this was whenever I was studying the final Hajj, and I was like, oh, this is really dumb. Why would Muslims think this is the final ayah? So this is my version of Surah 115, which I named the completion. So it goes, this is the final revelation from Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, the all-wise, the all-knowing. The religion has been perfected and the book has been sealed, safeguarded from distortion, firmly established without any deficiency. O Messenger, convey what has been revealed to you from your Lord, for you have fulfilled the trust, and we bear witness that you have conveyed the message. Cursed are those who distort its words or alter its meanings. Those indeed are the losers. And those who believe and follow its guidance live with piety in this world, and in the hereafter they will enter gardens beneath which rivers flow, abiding therein forever. And Allah is the most gracious, the all-wise. So I wrote that to have a concentric structure where we praise Allah at the beginning and end. You have religion being perfected at the beginning and end. You have the messenger giving his final revelation being confirmed, and a curse at the middle. So like the chunk of the middle. So I had the same thing like the throne verse, which Muslims praise all the time, and actually translated this into Arabic and made it into a final thing, which I should have on screen while I'm reading this. But the Arabic itself follows, it's classical Arabic, and it follows the same styles of the Quran. It rhymes, it's poetic, uses the same terminology. So this appears to be a better surah than what the Quran revealed for its ending. So, you know, the challenge of the Quran to prove its authenticity is make a surah like it if you dare. Well, I made this and I had ChatGPT translate it, and my limited understanding of Arabic helped that process. I think it's better. What does it say about the Quran? Why couldn't Allah, the all-knowing, the all-powerful, the most wise, the eternal being, have been as as clear or more clear than me with my limited, stupid understanding in his eternal book. This random made up surah that I made in 3 minutes while walking home one day. Why is that seems to be more clear than Allah's own revelation? That seems like a problem to me. If 5.3 was a late revelation meant to signal Islam's completion, its placement near the surah's start amid earlier verses that are about the same topic undermines the finality of the Quran. A truly perfected religion might have a clearer structure, like the Bible, for example. The Bible has a great structure, a great beginning, a great end. Instead, the Quran has its ending sit amid dietary rulings followed by earlier verses on unrelated topics, suggesting a humanly arranged text rather than a divinely fixed one, a divinely inspired, divinely authored one. So Surah 5 begins with instructions on lawful and unlawful foods, and 5.3, it fits perfectly in that context because it starts by, prohibited to you are dead animals, blood, and but whoever is forced by necessity, you can then eat it. And then it says, this day I've perfected your religion to you. So scholars like Al-Tabari suggest that 5.3 was placed here to emphasize the completion of dietary laws in Islam's core framework, tying it to the surah's opening focus on obligations. That weakens the context of 5.3 being the final revelation which seals the Quran, as the context it is used in suggests not finality of the book, but instead a completeness of what is and what is not halal. That's what its focus is. So it's not actually finishing the book, it's finishing dietary laws and practices. This also is in contrast to the further revelation that was given after Surah 5. So Surah 110 and Surah 9 was needed for the religious framework of Islam. So Surah 9 was abrogating much of the past. It also broke the oath with the Quraysh in order for them to go and conquer in Surah 110, which then praises Allah for the victory that they achieved. So if Surah 9 and Surah 110 were needed, then the religion's understanding was still developing, which would make things with like Surah 9.5 and Surah 9.29 abrogating earlier sections, the peaceful section specifically, because that's the sword verse, which Ibn Kathir and modern scholars admit. If that is actually abrogating the peaceful sections of like Surah 2, that would make the Quran still be developing, not be complete. Why is it that more things were revealed after Surah 5? Why is it that Surah 5.3 is stitched into Surah 5 when there's 2 other revelations that come after it? So Muslims might argue that 5.3 refers to perfection of Islam's core principles, such as monotheism, prayers, zakats, and not every single specific detail, and that abrogation refines and not contradicts the religion, but that just doesn't make any sense. So like ongoing revelations and textual changes suggest an evolving, not finalized system. This isn't what you would expect for God's final revelation to the world. This at least makes it unclear as to what the ending is, which, as I stated earlier, disproves Islam because the Quran repeatedly claims to be perfectly clear. So that's a pretty big problem. The traditional chronology and canonical non-chronological ordering of the surahs also obscure a literal ending of the Quran, because the ending is given so close to the beginning. You have so much material that's way after it. It doesn't appear to have any coherence to its order, which adds to the appearance of a man-made book. It was constructed over and through human agency rather than divine dictation. There is nothing about this that appears to be divine. That's the problem. So there's also a big problem of this is how the Quran was compiled itself. This was compiled by Uthman after parts were lost, which we'll get to. The companions themselves were the ones that decided to place Surah 5.3 in where they placed it. So if that was given during the final Hajj, they themselves put it where it was, which reinforces the idea that the Quran reflects human effort, not an eternal, unchanged divine speech. And there are further problems past this because we have lost verses as well. We have several hadith that claim that parts of the Quran were fully lost. Like Aisha claimed that Surah 33 originally had 200 verses and was reduced down to 73 during Uthman's compilation. We have another hadith by Ubayd ibn Ka'b, which suggests that 33 was once as long as Surah Al-Baqarah, which is 286 verses. So we have Surah 33 either being cut down by 130 or 210 verses. And they list some of the things that were in it, which was breastfeeding adults and stoning adulterers. And if you don't know, the Quran actually tells people that, hey, if you are fearing that your wife is going to be cheating on you with this man as whenever you leave for like work trips, you should have your wife breastfeed the man 10 times in order for him to think of her as her mother. I don't know about you, but that does not seem like a thing that would actually cause lust to end. I'll just leave it at that. Putting your boob in someone's mouth is not a solution to the problem of lust. But the Quran seems to have thought that that was a good idea, and that was removed. So you have that problem. And the reason why it was lost is because a tame goat came in and ate parts of the Quran, and that was lost. And that was the only manuscript that they had of that section of the Quran. So Muslims like to point out that this just means that Allah abrogated those verses inside of Surah 33. But that creates a major problem as well. If Allah abrogated these verses, this was done after Muhammad had already died, and Muhammad was the seal of the prophets. But Allah stated in Surah 42:51 that he only reveals things through prophets. So was Aisha a prophet, or was the goat a prophet in abrogating it? That's a problem. So that part of the Quran was just gone. Then you also have the Battle of Yamama, which the Muslims believed that people who had memorized the Quran would be protected from Allah by Allah because Allah promised to preserve his document. So in the Battle of Yamama, they sent out every single Quran reciter to the front line to fight the battle so that they would be guaranteed victory. But they lost the battle, and many of them were killed. And we have, I believe, Abu Bakr, which makes the statement that how can any one of you say I have memorized the entire Quran when much of it has been lost? Instead, say I know what remains of it. So we have Abu Bakr admitting that much of the Quran was lost. We have differences in variations of how people were speaking it. We also have Abdullah ibn Masud, which whenever he looked at Uthman's Quran, his manuscript, he said specifically, I liked the way Muhammad said it better. I liked Muhammad's version better. So the Uthmanic Quran that we have is different from Muhammad's Quran that he delivered, according to the top reciter, according to Muhammad. So Muhammad said Ibn Masud was the best man to learn the Quran from. That man said that the one that they have now was different from the one Muhammad gave, and that the Muhammadan one was better. And then he ordered people to hide their versions of the Quran because Uthman was burning them in order to destroy variants. So the Quran was not perfectly preserved. We also see this with the Santa manuscript. So in the Santa manuscripts, which was a variety of documents that were hidden in the ceiling of a mosque, that whenever they were renovating it, they broke the ceiling and a bunch of books fell. These got auctioned off and they got recorded, and there's a bunch of books that are comparing them. And they found that underneath the top layer of the text, they actually found a pre-Uthmanic codex below it. So there's two different Qurans that disagree with each other inside of the Sana pamphlet sets. And a lot of these also had major contradictions within them. So I'm going to put up a picture on screen now with some of the contradictions. Now you'll notice that a lot of that is not that important, but we do have the one from Surah 2:196, which has fasting or alms or an offering, or just fasting or an offering. Well, alms is one of the major parts of the Quran, major parts of the religion is zakat. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Here is a variant where we have the zakat missing from the original, which is interesting. Why is that? So if you want to check out the full list, you can go to the book. This book was done by Benem Sedeghi and Mohsen Gordjuzri, and it is called Sana 1 and the Origins of the Quran. They have it's like a 100-page document. It's very, very good. It details the origins of the Quran. It details how we have seen the textual efforts. Like we see all the changes that happen over time. You also get that author Jeffrey's book, which was Materials for the History of the Text of the Quran, and that is cataloging many such differences between the qira'ats. So all of those together, you have the Quran being partially destroyed by the goat in the Battle of Yamama. You have alterations and differences within the text itself, and you don't have a clear ending. So the Quran appears to be not perfectly preserved and not perfectly clear and not coherent, and appears to be made by humans that deliberately altered it. That's a big problem. Not only all of that, you also have the problems with like legal rulings, where you have like the punishment for stoning, the rajam, in cases of adultery in the hadith literature, but you don't have it in the Quran anymore when it was supposed to be in Surah 24:2. It was removed, but there's a hadith that is sahih that includes it in that passage. So we know from the hadith, we know from the histories, we know from the manuscripts that we have that the Quran's been changed, that there are parts that are lost, that it is not a complete book. Which is interesting. When Allah promised himself to guard it and preserve it, it has not been preserved. Also get into the problem of abrogation, which abrogation itself is debated amongst scholars. Whenever the Quran is supposed to be perfectly clear, there are dozens of different lists of abrogations and dozens of different definitions of what abrogation means. But yet, most of them agree that there is contradictory material within the Quran that needs abrogation in order for it not to be false. So abrogation has to exist because the Quran is incoherent because it has contradictions. But yet the scholars themselves over the history can't agree on what the abrogations are and can't even agree what abrogation is. That is more evidence that the Quran is not perfectly clear, that there's problems within the Quran itself. So all of that together shows that the Quran is an incomplete content. It's a work of human hands, it's contradictory and fails its own standards, and thus it's not the work of God to be trusted according to Islam's own standards. So I've written a 17-page summary of this video, and that's going to be in the description of this video. I highly recommend check it out. There's some things I left out in the video. But this video is already going to be so long, I didn't want it to be that long. So this is a major problem. So some quick rebuttals as well, because I know there's going to be comments about these things. So I'm going to mention some of these rebuttals right now. So the first one is the Muslims memorized the text and that made it preserved, and Uthman only standardized the readings and he destroyed the non-Qurans that were variants of the actual Quran, which that in and of itself would have been a problem. Which memorization, even in oral cultures, explains strong preservation of particular recitations, but doesn't actually remove the historical facts of variant readings within the manuscripts, a deliberate Uthmanic policy to suppress variant codexes, and palimpsests evidence that show textual polarity within the histories. So the standard manuscripts just show that doesn't really work. And memorization plus later standardization is itself a historically contingent preservation process, not proof of the preserved text itself, not proof that the present text exactly mirrors a single eternal, preordained, fully delivered corpus. An old Chinese proverb that I really love, which is the weakest ink is stronger than the strongest memory. I think that is perfectly true. How is it that the Chinese got that understanding so well, yet Allah didn't? It's amazing. Chinese got it right, Allah did not. So another rebuttal is going to be that those are weak hadiths about the missing verses, that the chains are not good, it's weak chains, and there are so many reports about it, and it is disputed in a variety of different sources, but it doesn't really matter because hadith science itself is bad. Bob from Seeker's Corner did stream on this a little bit, should Christians trust the hadith sources, and Yasser Qadhi's also admitted that hadith science is laughed out of the room in academic circles. Hadith science, the idea of isnad chains as evidence, is stupid. Just to put it bluntly, it is terrible science. And my point isn't to that we have incontrovertible proof that the Quran's been corrupted because of textual laws. That doesn't really matter. My point is that the tradition itself preserves reports and memory of non-uniform textual states, that the Quran itself throughout history has been changed according to Muslims. That's my point. And every textual historian agrees on it. We have many works on the Quran and its changes, and the Qira'at and its changes, and the changes of its meaning and its context. I will eventually make a video just on the Qira'ats. But yeah, another one is abrogation is just a part of divine pedagogy and not a sign of imperfection. Pedagogy is the evolution of teaching style and content. So when we say, oh, well, abrogation is just refining earlier rulings, the Bible does this too. You know, the Old Testament and the New Testament, Jesus just refines the Old Testament. It's like, sure, it kind of does that to an extent, and pedagogy is philosophically coherent to an extent over time to different people groups. But the Quran does it to the same people group within the lifetime of Muhammad, within 23 years. Why is it that if this book is divinely inspired, divinely dictated by Allah, that he would need so much abrogation? Because there are some lists that have like hundreds of verses that are abrogated. Why was it that Allah would need so much abrogation in order to perfect the Quran when it's only delivered over 23 years? The Bible was delivered over 1400 years by dozens of authors. This is one man, 23 years, and hundreds of abrogations that are happening. Why? If it's complete, perfect, and clear, why does it need to be changed so much? Why does it need to be assembled in ways that make no sense by human authors, including the Meccan surahs having Medinan verses put into it, later editorialization in order to make the Meccan surahs line up more theologically with the Medinan surahs, because the theology of Mecca and the theology of Medina are different. Why is this the case? Why is this happening? What is the Quran if it is doing these things? Is it the perfectly clear, divine inspired speech of Allah, or is it a man-made document that's the ramblings of some death cult leader that used it to gain what he wanted? I think it's the latter. I have no evidence towards the former. There's nothing in the Quran that indicates that it is divinely inspired. So, in summary, either the Quran is incomplete and Allah failed giving his full presentation, and he failed to preserve it because there's so much of it that's lost, or the Quran is complete, it was abrogated successfully, somehow, by the goat, and we have the full document in its original intended content by Allah that he somehow guided all the men who guided Abu Bakr and Uthman, even though they're not prophets, because Muhammad's the seal of the prophets, which is his own problem. They're not prophets, but they're able to actually compile the Quran the way that it's supposed to be compiled, somehow, through revelation. If it is compiled and it is the word of Allah, the way that Allah wanted, it's unclear because it doesn't have a clear ending. It doesn't have any finality to it. So either Muhammad would have received more revelations, which I personally believe that he would have, or he would not have received more revelations and the book's not clear. Either way, I think we can safely say the Quran is false. If you like this video, check out some of my other videos on Islam. Let me know in the comments below what you think I did wrong, what I did right. Check out the full document. It's pretty cool. May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you always.